In this example, case study 6, we're going to be finding requirements that do not have text. Um, in this example, we're going to use a smart package, and we're going to return all of the requirements in the model that don't have any text, um, except for the ones that have owned elements. So if a requirement owns other elements, then we wouldn't expect it to have any text, because it's just kind of there as a placeholder to say, okay, these types of requirements that are nested under this are going to be like electronics and electric, etc. Okay, so um, the way that we are going to go about that is by creating a smart package, and we're going to be using the filter operation. Now, the filter operation is a little bit complicated. I actually had to do a little bit of digging to kind of understand it completely. Um, but essentially, you give it an input. In this case, we're going to find all the requirements in the model, and then we have a predicate that we have to give it. And when our logic is true or false, that's going to add it to a list, a return list. So let's say we have all the requirements in the model, and our logic is that they have no text. Then this, whenever we have to find a logic that is going to return true or false for that. So if it returns true, then it's going to add it to a list, um, and we will be able to access that list through, in this case, a smart package. If it's not, then it won't be added to the list and we'll move on to the next. So we have an input of a find, and then for predicate, we're going to create an operation from the model, and we're going to do an if then else statement. The if then else statement allows us to do a couple of different nested operations. So if we look up another thing that's interesting about the filter is it has this nested operation. Whenever you do a predicate, whenever you do any type of operation from the model, I think the only one that doesn't do it is if you do a script directly, then it won't be a nested operation. But any operation that you choose will create this thing called a nested operation. And if we hover over the nested operation, let me open it up real quick like so that you can see it. If we hover over, let me create a new one. So let's do filter and then this nested operation. We can see that a nested operation, it passes an argument to the outer operation without having to call it immediately. So whenever we have this if then else, if this returns true, then we will pass this argument back up as the predicate, and it will add it to the list. So we're doing an if then else. The first thing that we are going to check for is if the requirement is empty. So we're going to do is empty. And then under that, we're actually, there's actually a typo in these instructions. So now we're going to go into the actual model and build this ourselves. So we're going to go under query, and we are going to create operation. We are going to create a filter. Filter comes with input and a predicate. For the input, we want the input to be the requirements in the model. For the predicate, we want to do a nested operation, and then we want to do an if then else. We change this argument to rec, and then the if then else, we're going to say if is empty. So we're getting the requirements in the model, and we're saying if they're empty, Now we're going to be a little bit more specific. We're going to go to that requirement and we're going to see, does it have any owned elements? This owned element, it can have owned elements, that's okay. We want to filter requirements into it. So we want to check the requirements. It's okay if it has others. For instance, if a requirement has a nested comment or something like that, that's okay. It should still have text. But if it has a nested requirement, then we want to. It's okay if it does not have text. If its owned elements are empty, then we are going to do another if then else and check to see, and we want to do an is empty. And now we check abstract requirement for its text. Okay, and if it is empty, we are going to return true. Otherwise, we are going to input the script, and which can be copied from the documentation website here. And we're just saying if the text is empty, then we're going to check its size. If it's greater than 0, we need to find out what is inside of it. Is it actual text or is it some information that we don't care about? So if it's greater than 0, we're going to trim it to get rid of the white space, and then we're going to look at the length and compare that length to 0. If after we trim it, it's equal to 0, then we are going to return true and add it to the list. Otherwise, if this is false, it returns false, and if something else happens, then we just return false. So if you notice, we're using text here, so we need to change this because we're actually feeding it. Right now we're feeding it a requirement, but we need to feed it the requirements text. And then we also need to change this to text. Okay, so now this should work. And if none of those are true, then we are going to return false. And as we can see, we've got 4 requirements that meet this criteria. And these happen to be, I think, some requirements that I was just testing in one of the case studies previously. And there you have it.